But they had even taken some of the popes and had them married to women that the popes never knew. So that's basically it. Church rules is that no name should be submitted who was born less than 95 years ago without family permission. In other words, living relatives have to give permission. That's the rule, and it's almost never followed. Almost never followed. Obviously, I'm sure they didn't look up all the relatives of 6 million Holocaust victims to get permission. One of the things about polygamy was that for many years at the beginning, after polygamy was acknowledged, there were some just very strange things that did go on. There were many cases where women, I think I mentioned this last time, were married in marriages, legal marriages, and then either Joseph or Brigham would come to them and tell them that God had given them a revelation that she was supposed to be his wife. So they would sometimes, most of the time at the beginning, these women would be then sealed by a temple ordinance to another man who was higher up in the church echelon than their husband, but they would continue to live with their husband. Sometimes even have children still with their husbands. But eternally, when they died, they knew they would be with this higher Mormon man in the celestial kingdom. Now I'm going to read you, this was a turning point for me, and it happened many years ago, but there was a man by the name of Henry Jacobs, and his wife's name was Zina. And she had been living in Joseph Smith's home. I think a lot of times they had servant girls, or they'd take women in to help who, at least that's what Emma thought. Emma was the wife. She married a man by the name of Henry B. Jacobs, who became a devout member of the church. And when she was 6 months pregnant with their first baby, she was sealed to Joseph Smith. She had continued to live with Henry, and when she was pregnant with her second child, this was after Joseph Smith had been murdered, she was resealed to him, why we don't know, and also sealed to Brigham Young for time only, which means Brigham Young then had permission to have access to her bed. And shortly, let's see, they lived together, Zina and Henry lived together as husband and wife until the Mormon pioneers had reached Iowa on their major journey west to Utah. At this temporary stop on the Pioneer Trail, Brigham Young announced that it was time for men who were walking in other men's shoes to step out of them. This is a quote. "Brother Jacobs, the woman you claim for a wife does not belong to you. She is the spiritual wife of Brother Joseph, sealed up to him. I am his proxy, and she in his behalf with her children are my property. You can go where you please and get another, but be sure to get one of your own kindred spirit." President Young then called Jacobs on a mission to England. Witnesses to his departure commented that he was so emotionally ill, they had to put him on a blanket and carry him to the boat to get him on his way. He knew what was going to happen. Henry returned from his mission and settled in California, but he was still in love with his wife, Zina, now a plural wife of Brigham Young. Henry's letters to his wife, Zina, were heartrending. On the 2nd of September, 1852, he wrote, "Oh, how happy I should be if only I could see you and the little children, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. I am unhappy," he lamented. "There is no peace for poor me. My pleasure is you. My comfort has vanished. Oh, Zina, will I ever get you again? Answer the question, please." And he put this in a valentine that he sent to her. Zina, my mind will never change from worlds without ends. No, never. The same affection is there and never can be moved. I do not murmur nor complain of the handlings of God. No, verily. No, but I feel alone and no one can speak to call my own. I feel like a lamb without a mother. I do not blame any person or persons. No, may the Lord our Father bless Brother Brigham and all pertains unto him forever. Tell him for me, I have no feelings against him, nor never had. All is right according to the law of the celestial kingdom of our God, Joseph Smith. That, was not a typical polygamous thing for most people in the church who lived it, but that kind of thing happened with the high leadership of the church a lot. And I told you last time that I firmly believe, and still do to this day, that most people who lived polygamy for the whole entire time it was being lived truly believed it was a commandment of God and lived it for what they believed were righteous reasons. And I have great respect for how difficult it was for them, especially for the women, and how much, what a sacrifice it was for them to live something that they, found extremely difficult, and it was very abusive to women sometimes. They thought it was a commandment of God. They just, they believed it. I'm not going to cover this next thing I'm going to mention. Maybe sometime I'll come back and give a whole presentation on this, but how many of you are aware of the Hoffman murders in Salt Lake City, the forgeries and all that went on about 25 years ago? Very, very interesting story. And it has to do with older records of the church and documentations and things that were not supposedly favorable to the church and done by what the FBI and everybody says is probably the most gifted forger in American history, in world history probably. So there's just a lot of things that have gone on, and some murders happened as a result of that. The church was not involved in the murders whatsoever, but it circled around some very interesting history in the church. Now I want to talk about something that, and I'm going to read some quotes that, they're just so offensive in a way that I've hesitated about reading them, but I think it's necessary to give you the background, and that's the Mormon Doctrine about the blacks. Now for most, until 1977, I believe it was, blacks could be baptized into the Mormon church, but the men could not ever have what they called the priesthood power, which is, and I did talk about that last time, how that came about. But so that they could be members of the church, but they were second-class members of the church because of the fact the men could not have the priesthood meant they could not go to the temple, and it meant that then they could not be sealed to their families for eternity. And that doctrine started becoming the doctrine of the church very early after they got to Utah. And I'm going to read you some quotes. It shows you where this. They believe, the Mormon doctrine is that before the world was populated, that there was a great God the Father presented a plan or an idea to all of us who were there as his spirit children, and talked about this world he created, and that he wanted to put us down here to test us and bring us back to him. That there was a great battle that went on up there about the way that was to be done, and that a third of the people went with Lucifer, who presented a plan, and they became the sons of perdition, and they never got to come here and have a body. Then there were the ones on the other end of the spectrum who liked God's plan and were willing to make the sacrifice and come down here and be tested, and maybe they might not discover the Mormon church, and therefore maybe they would never get back. But then there was another third who were the waverers, who sat on the fence. They couldn't decide which way to go. And according to modern doctrine, those are the people who are born here with a dark skin. That's their punishment. And so that was the rationale behind blacks not being able to have the priesthood, that somehow they just weren't worthy enough. In 1997, that was finally changed, and
78.
Oh, 78. I'm gonna be smart. And I can remember the day that announcement came out that the church was now going to let the blacks have the priesthood. It came over the radio. I was in a store, and I actually heard it over the radio. And I was so, because it had always been a problem for me. Nothing, I could not understand the doctrine. It didn't make sense to me. It pained me. And I left the store, bundled my kids in the car, and raced home to tell my husband. It was so exciting to me. But the point I'm going to make here is that the doctrine as to why blacks have a dark skin has not changed.